Now we discuss something related to disorders and their interpretation in general. Now let us look at one particular disorder and go in the qualifying criteria and apply it feature by feature. So I was saying we applied Freudian psychoanalytic thinking to disorders in general. And now what we do is let us take up one particular disorder and go into its features and apply psychoanalytic knowledge at the level of the features. So let's say we open schizophrenia from, and these are the diagnostic criteria that two or more of the following you must have. So you have delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, catatonic behavior, negative symptoms. So let us look at applying Freudian knowledge to each of these qualifying criteria. So delusions, we have seen how each of the delusion has a different psychoanalytic process underlying it. So we saw delusion of persecution, erotomania, jealousy, megalomania, reference. We saw these 5 delusions and the psychoanalytic process is related to them. Now let us look at the second qualifying criteria, hallucinations, which is to see what does not exist, which is to see or hear what is not there. So psychoanalytically, how would we look at it? Something is so difficult that it is thrown out of oneself and one creates a new reality. So in hallucination, delusions, we have seen the psychoanalytic basis of it. In hallucination, something is so difficult that it's projected out of oneself. For the simple reason it's so difficult to bear. And you almost concretely create a parallel reality, sensually, perceptually speaking. So the first is something is so difficult. What can it be? It can either be wish fulfillment leading to hallucination or evacuation of difficult material. These are the two prime reasons for hallucination. One is wish fulfillment of some type. Second is evacuation of difficult material. And third is to communicate a story so difficult to communicate even to oneself. And that is what takes us into the content of hallucination. Let us take a few examples. Somebody is hearing voices which are critical of him. And these are coming from outside, is very clear. So what usually happens is, it is the voice of the superego projected out. The voice of the superego is so difficult to bear inside, it is projected out. And obviously, that superego voice is in response to something in the id so unacceptable that the superego makes such a harsh judgment on it. So unless that thing in the id is accepted or lived out or catharted out in some way, this dynamic cannot change, that there is an unacceptable desire and there is a punitive, harsh superego attacking that desire, and that voice of the superego is thrown out because one cannot give up that desire. Second can be a visual hallucination, where you can have a wish fulfillment based upon what you see. or concretization and evacuation of some fear inside. If it's a very pleasant hallucination, it is more likely to be a wish fulfillment. If it's a terrifying hallucination, more likely to be a concretized projection or evacuation out of oneself. And more, we are able to integrate and assimilate difficult desires and fears within ourselves, the weaker the hallucination grows. The more we integrate inside, the weaker the hallucination goes outside. The more we work on our repression, on accepting the difficult desires and fears inside, the more integration happens inside, the weaker the hallucination becomes outside. This is one of the places where we are reminded of what Jung used to say, that the most terrifying thing in the world is to know oneself completely. There are corners of us so difficult to accept in terms of desires and fears and pent up difficult feelings, that it's better that we feel it's better to keep it repressed. So the more we accept and integrate, the more we cathart out, the weaker the hallucination becomes. The more interpretation is made and we accept it in therapy, that it's our own superego which is we are projected out, the weaker those voices become. There will be quite a big group of patients who will go into these hallucinations once for a short time, come back and never go there again. There will be a very big group of people who are usually neurotic. Occasionally, when it intensifies, it goes into psychosis. For some time, they hear this, they come back again into neurosis. The healthy part of them overcomes this, and then they never go back. So this very short period hallucination, right, a large number of neurotic problem patients would have experienced. But consistently it being there, what we call proper hallucination. So a short micro experience of hallucination, a large population will have. But the large, what we call hallucination proper according to DSM, stable, steady hallucination, that is difficult, where the inner material is so difficult to accept and integrate. So the nature of it and the content of it will slowly lead us to the story. So the most common question in psychoanalysis is, what does it mean? And by asking that, we are asking, what does it mean in the inner world? So the more we integrate, more we cathart, more we accept, the weaker it becomes. Do you have any examples so we can specifically analyze them of hallucination? Any patient that you are seeing? If you can remember any specific hallucination, we can try to analyze it psychoanalytically.
I can't immediately say of a visual or ordinary hallucination, but I remember seeing an adolescent boy, a patient whom I used to see uh, long ago,
Right.
and he was complaining that tying of the belt, the leather belt on the pants, was very tightening, but he could not leave it also. He could not stop wearing that, and it was too much of tightening. And his father was very uh, perceived as cruel and harsh, and he was not autonomous enough to achieve on his own or earn on his own. So I understood it as ambivalence toward the father, which was uh, by tightening the belt, and it was too tight. So that was his complaint.
Right. So one meaning is that he is too controlled. too tightly controlled. The second meaning of it is he has to tighten the belt, which means he always has to be in that very austere, very vigilant, and very self-monitoring mode, lest he do something that the father attacks. And the third is he has to tighten the belt metaphorically so that the pants don't drop, and which means he is not put to shame in public, because the father may be in habit of humiliating him in public. And the fourth is it's a protection against castration. That the pant in a way covers up the penis and the scrotum. But the more dynamic seems to be, it's a prevention against public humiliation, public shaming.
But it was more of tightening on the stomach, so his gratification was by deprivation by the father. He would not allow him to eat and put the food inside.
Correct.
So,
Correct. So this is where it goes into the analytic interest. Then what does it mean? The same thing can mean so many things. And this is where the case history and the discussion with the patient allows us to go with the process of elimination and come to the right one. So the critical voice of God that many people hear is also an externalization of the superego. At times, it is the external projection of one's own narcissistic omnipotent self. That one is hearing what one wants to hear, right? Secretly told to oneself by oneself, but the story is put up of God. Disorganized speech.
understand it as a feature of, again, ambivalence, catatonia. They want to communicate, but they want to hide the meaning.
Correct. So this is the classical Freudian state of the Oedipus, to be or not to be. So in Shakespeare, there is a statement, to be or not to be is the question. And this is, according to Freud, a classical Oedipal situation. That the child is in fear and guilt. Should I do it or not do it? So to be or not to be in Freudian, for Freud, was an Oedipal question. He never thought of it as an existential question. He thought of it more as an Oedipal question. Of course, existential philosophers think of it as existential question, not as an Oedipal question at all. But Freud was very clear it was an Oedipal question. To be or not to be. So one part of disorganized speech is it can be because of very high castration anxiety. That the anxiety leads to disorganization of the speech. Which is what we see even in Viva. If somebody is very afraid in Viva, he is not able to speak as fluently as he speaks outside. There is impairment of a low level. I mean, you won't call it impairment in the DSM sense, but impairment in the normal sense. So this, according to Freud, will be outcome of very high anxiety. And that will be outcome of castration anxiety. In fact, the best explanation for this, I think, comes from Bion, not from Freud. When we do Wilfred Bion, at that time we will look at it. He talks of it as attack on linking. that the process of thinking actually is a process where one idea links to the other, and the third links to the fourth, and the chain is formed. Now, if you focus on this whole process of linking, or if you attack this process of linking, the chain breaks. And that leads to what we call not relevant and coherent. And he says the attack on linking happens because of envy. And I had said before that I personally believe that, of course, what he says is true, but apart from envy, narcissistic rage can also do the same attack. So that, to me, is a more convincing explanation. But today we'll limit ourselves to Freud, and we will say it is outcome of high anxiety because of unresolved Oedipus, and the anxiety is a castration anxiety. Catatonic behavior. Catatonic behavior will be very high anal and Oedipal rage, at times even oral rage, and very high repression. So there are two kinds of catatonic states which often are misleading. One is a catatonic state where there is vacuum or emptiness of some sort, which is regression to primary narcissism. That one is not interacting with the outside world, but one does not seem agitated, or we don't see the bottled up of psychomotor activity. We don't get that feel. That feel that somebody in front of us is catatonic, but there is bottled up energy that we don't feel. And there, the catatonic behavior is because of regression to primary narcissism. At times, we will feel that the catatonic behavior is because of two very strong and opposing forces who have come into a traffic jam. So very high aggression, very high ego strength and repression. And this you will see mostly when you have a schizoid personality disorder and that person goes into catatonia. That you have a situation where you have a schizoidal personality disorder, that person has also schizophrenia and goes into catatonia, and there the differentiating feature will be there will be occasionally catatonic excitement when the control loosens and the inner held back aggression that comes out. So we can look at it in two ways. One, catatonia, where you have occasional excitement, where there is a logjam of aggression and repression, and one where there is a going back of primary narcissism. Underlying is the disappointment is complete for those who are going back to primary narcissism, whereas those who are catatonic because of another reason of repression, the disappointment is still not complete. They are still hopeful and ready to engage with the object world. Second, they are also not looking at the object world as unbearable in terms of affect. Whereas because of very high sensitivity, those who get into primary narcissism, they see the affect of the object world as unbearable. So the prognosis is much better when you are dealing with strength. That what you see as inert is because of a logjam of two strong forces, versus what you see as inert is because of vacuum.
What did you say about affecting the object world is?
Like, let us say,
What did you say? I lost the last word.
uh-huh.
Affect of the object world is when one feels completely hopeless.
Yeah. So let us say I relate to four people, and one by one I feel disappointed and I leave and they leave, whatever happens. And after the every time, some disappointment builds up. Now, when the disappointment becomes very strong, I get into resignation and I say, I am done with it, no more, enough of it. So then I don't want to relate to the fifth person. So what happens is the disappointment is so deep, it leads to resignation. And then there is no incentive to relate to the object world, this world of people and objects. And that deep disappointment and resignation results in a withdrawal into oneself. Now, that can happen in two ways. One, there is a complete withdrawal and a depression kind of state. There is a withdrawal and the sadness has not been catharted out yet. The second situation can be there is a withdrawal. The sadness is either catharted out, lived out, or deactivated in one corner of the mind. And part of the regression is to the primary narcissism, where one feels slight amount of bliss and the oceanic feeling. So these two will be very deep disappointment-led withdrawals. Whereas if I want to engage with the world, but I'm very angry at three people, but I'm still wanting to engage with the fourth, I don't say I'm done with the world. I am going to engage and retry and achieve my objectives, whatever my desires are. And I am catatonic, which means I have not got into that state of repeated disappointment and resignation. I am angry at everybody who has disappointed me, but I have not thrown down my weapons. So now what happens is there is huge amount of anger, and because the ego strength is very high, there is huge amount of repression. And the repression is able to hold it 95% of the times. And when the capacity breaks down, you have that excitement, what we call the catatonic excitement. So that is easier to deal with. Relatively speaking, of course, both are difficult to deal with, absolutely. But in relative terms, the catatonic thing where we see occasional excitement is easier to deal with than to be with completely negative features.
I've seen catatonic patients completely in withdrawal statue for years together in
Right,
mental hospitals.
correct. Tell me something more about it. What was your experience?
I believe that I must have put down my weapons and I subsumed to the neurobiological theory when it came to such psychotic patients. And I accepted that physical methods of treatment are essential and necessary. And
Right.
I did not do any attempt at interpreting or discussing with those patients. So that was, I take it as a failure from my side. Perhaps the work in mental hospital also was the environment and those days
Hey,
did
what
not
you're,
allow.
what you're saying is correct. There is a strong biological component. And with psychotherapy, also, very few people have got good results.
Yeah.
So it is actually something very difficult to pull off. Very few people get good results. Like catatonia is one, negative symptoms is second, uh,
Yes.
uh, sociopathy and psychopathy is third. These are the areas where very few people have got good results in psychotherapy.
Thought the meanings of syndromes made sense. And if the patient was capable of forming a dialogue,
Right,
and we could understand that if excessive regression because of the in the face of adversity was discussable, then we could perhaps stop the patient from going into hebephrenic regression.
correct, correct.
If the patient's continuous vigilance, if we could uh, assure him to lower his guard in limited situations with limited people, then if you get well in one relationship, you get better. So even one relationship can be protective.
Let me,
And
yeah, sir, please go on. Sorry, please go on.
no, that was this. Catatonic was postponement of solution.
Right.
So it was continuous freeze, and they don't want to move anything. So these meanings they helped. Hebephrenia, catatonia, paranoia, that is continuous watch, and we discussed paranoia in detail. And that was useful for me.
Um, Let me bring two cases of mine long back. Both of them I could not do much. I failed in both of them, but very interesting. Uh, One was regression to primary narcissism, where diagnosed with schizophrenia with negative features, medication given, after some time stopped, would not take medication, uh, was in session for a period of say 2 months, once a week. Sorry, twice a week, 2 months. Twice a week, 2 months. Uh, the difficulty, I mean, what I could do was give him the knowledge because I knew this can end anytime. So one of the things in such situations you can do is give him the knowledge which will be useful to him even after the therapy ends, right? Which he can use to some extent, not fully, but to some extent in a do-it-yourself mode. Because you know it's very difficult that 80% chances are it will end very soon. Because this is what that group,
Yes.
fragile narcissism, sociopathy, psychopathy, uh, regression to primary narcissism, schizoid coupled with catatonia, very difficult to hold them. So I knew, okay, it's a high risk game that in all probability I won't see the third month. So whatever you could do. So one of the things I did was, of course, to put in that knowledge, the core knowledge of why he's suffering, what he's suffering. But the failure there was the fragile narcissism would not allow him to accept that he has a problem. So this is a very unique group where the first problem is to accept the problem. The moment they accept the problem, there is such high anxiety inside and such so uncomfortable that their first problem is to accept that I have a problem. And the difficulty is how long can you go with the denial of the person, hoping that soon the denial will go, the problem will be accepted, and then you can start the real work. So this is a very difficult situation because this fragile narcissism is so difficult. I know of some cases where for 1.5 years, the person could not accept that I have a problem. He would come to the therapy. So therapist would ask, if you have no problem, why are you coming here? So the person would say, just because like that, I like it here. I get a place to talk myself. I feel it good in other ways. That I don't have a problem, but I feel better. It's a quality of life thing. It's not really a problem solving thing. I don't see it as a clinical thing. I see it more as an intellectual thing. So anyway, so I remembered that part, but that could not be solved. So two problems came up in the first patient I lost. One was the difficulty of accepting that I have a problem, fragility, fragile narcissism. And second was one could not match the bliss of primary narcissism with anything that he will find by engaging with reality. And he was not ready to let go of that high pleasure. He was not ready to take that castration, that loss of heaven that we all have to accept as we go into the real world. So that was one. The second was schizoid with catatonic problem. There I lost because as the therapy proceeded and he was getting emotionally attached, he was terrified of that attachment. Because the whole schizoid constellation is based upon the terror of attachment. He avoids everybody.
Fear dilemma.
Yeah. So he is in a classical, I want attachment, I don't want attachment. He's stuck there. And he has decided to play it safe and not have attachments. And as the attachment with the therapist starts, he starts getting fearful because of the pain that attachments brought in the past, because of which he became schizoid in the first place. That because attachments brought pain, the mind decided at some level not to get attached henceforth, never again. And that never again we would reword as schizoid. So negative symptoms. So that way we can go one by one. Sorry, yeah.
If there are a couple of minutes, I could narrate a case of
Please go.
schizophrenia. He was a lawyer and he would also practice in Supreme Court. And it was soon after I joined the mental hospital that his case was presented because he thought that the RTO was after him because he lodged a complaint against them or wrote a letter in the newspaper that RTO are corrupt. And then he started developing persecutory delusions, got convinced, and he went to the police and told them that put me in the custody, that is the only safe place for me. The police did not accept, of course. So he went home in the middle of night, put on radio. That time only radios were there. And some South Indian music songs were playing, and he smothered his wife by putting pillow on her mouth and nose. And then he tried to resuscitate her after she had died. And his case was presented. The superintendent wanted everybody's opinion what should be done. And he said that he was arguing fluently that time. He said, "You declare me fit to stand trial, and I will show you that I can actually uh, be absolved. I can come out." And then was a very fresh. So I told him that I think that he's schizophrenic and he is not normal. And I'm sure our superintendent was a very wise man and very few words, but we did not realize it that time. And I thought he was doing a mistake. He made him fit for trial. The
Uh-huh.
patient stood the trial. As promised, he came out of that case claiming that I did not want to kill her. The motive was not there. And it was an accident. I wanted to go into the custody and therefore I tried to smother her. Look, I even tried to resuscitate her. I don't know what happened in the court, but he came out. And then after that, uh, a year later or so, he went on deteriorating because then he was discharged. So he was home. Then he would visit Sassoon Hospital. That time I had reached Sassoon on deputation, a teaching hospital. And we admitted him, we gave him full kinds of treatment, drugs, ECTs, everything. But he would go into catatonic stupor. He would not respond. It happened two, three, four times, and then subsequently he had to be admitted back to mental hospital, where over a period of couple of years he uh, became cachectic and died. I have seen his progress over a period of 7, 8 years, and
It's a
he
very
could not
interesting,
communicate later. Yeah,
it's a very interesting case. Very, very.
serious case, but and that time there were no other like what do you call that? Clozapine.
Huh.
All was there. Flufenazine decanoate, not even depo-allopurinol, which improved the picture quite a lot according to my observation in those days.
Right.
It was
So,
very sad case.
yeah. How would you apply Freud to him?
Ah, this is where I'm floored. I would say that and now this is not Freud. Please forgive me. I'm using my own
Please go
broken
on. Please
version.
go on.
I I think that his grandiosity he used to practice in the Supreme Court when he was qualified in Maharashtra, some remote part of Maharashtra. So that attempt was there. That must have been a threatening prospect for him, for his self-esteem. And then he uh, broke down and started projecting that people were against him, the system was against him. And then he tried to have a refuge or safety, again going to the authority, the police, who frustrated him. And so authority never uh, listened to him, kind of protected him, failed to protect him. And then he gave away.
Correct.
This is what I can think of now.
Correct. So, in Freudian terms, it would be right. The fear was of castration, of being castrated and killed, and that is because of unresolved Oedipus. And he goes then to the same authority figure asking to be saved, which is the police. So, police is the authority figure, and also the superego. So he goes to the superego and he goes to the authority figure, the father figure, for safety, but he is refused by both. Neither the superego will allow him to live, will not save him to live, nor the father figure will save him to live. And so he had that paranoid thing. And that paranoid thing, when that got projected, displaced onto the wife. Why displaced? Because if the only way out of that paranoia was to kill the person who was going to kill him. Now all the men objects in around him, they seemed too strong, too threatening, because he was looking at them like a child looking at the father. But the only person he could see powerless compared to him was the wife, who was possibly in a more submissive relationship with him, given the classical Indian situation. So he could, only way he could deal with the paranoia was to kill the person who is kill the source of paranoia, and that person who was going to kill him, and that can be done only by displacing it onto the wife. And after that was achieved, the guilt came up, and the loss came up of the wife, and he stood trial possibly because of that guilt. Of course, the tendency to save himself was also there. He saved himself. But a better explanation of this is Kleinian. That what would have happened really to this person is there would be very early in life an experience of loss, where in the first 4 months of life, he could not internalize a good, reliable, stable object. And that did not provide him the strength to actually go into personality disorders, which is slightly better than going into psychosis. And because of that early life loss and inability to internalize a good, reliable, stable object, the split remains open. We'll come to it later. But that keeps projecting the aggression outside, and you keep fearing it. And the fear there is of brutality and torture. That the paranoia is not that somebody will come and give me a poison pill. The paranoia is that somebody will come and kill me in a very brutal way. So that was going on, and because of that early life loss, it was not only psychosis, but there would be also some form of personality disorders underneath. And both of them would be going on, which means even when the psychotic episode is not florid, he would still find it difficult to adjust with the world. And that would have brought about failure, and that would have triggered even more megalomania. So the initial paranoia will lead to that megalomania. And that in turn will make him even more dysfunctional. And then a series of things will happen. If we have the full case history, probably we can analyze it more accurately. But here, really to do justice, we will use the Kleinian concepts, Freudian concepts, and some part of Bionian concept together, then we will be able to do a good psychoanalytic analysis. And it may be that one of those cases where nothing can be done. The slide is just so rapid and so powerful, we can't arrest it. It's 5 o'clock. Should we stop for the day?
I'm sorry for joining late.
बिल्कुल perfectly okay. So next time we will bring. Let us. Should we take next time a second chapter like anxiety or depression, or should we start with the cases?
Sir, you tell us.
Let us do one more chapter, anxiety and depression, and
Okay.
then we can go to real life cases.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.